California! You probably couldn't pay me to eat a McDonald's hamburger at this point in my life. Although, even the ultra-healthy video game nerd does enjoy a little McFlurry every now and then. Anyways, a brand as famous as McDonald's is bound to have lots of related paraphernalia, and there have been several video game inceptions over the years. The first thing that probably springs to mind for a lot of people is McDonald's Treasureland Adventure for the Sega Genesis, the very first game developed by my favorite video game company, Treasure. Great game, we all know it and love it. Some people may not know, there was a McDonald's game that was exclusive to Japan. This was an NES or a Famicom game released in 1987 by Data East called Donald Land. That's right, not Ronald, Donald. Not to be confused with the duck or the unfulfilled billionaire of the same name. Now in 1987, outside of Capcom and Konami, few companies were really able to take full advantage of the NES hardware yet, and the NES library consisted of a lot more simplistic, single-screen early arcade-style games. This is also reflected in the fact that a lot of the platformers made by relatively smaller companies during this time are a fraction of the price of the intricately developed platformers made from 1989 and beyond. In fact, almost all of my favorite NES games like Metal Storm, Vice Project Doom, and Power Blade 2 were made well into the 90s. Now to be fair, Data East was not really a small company, they were a major arcade developer, but they were always something of an underdog. The fact that Capcom was able to sue them into bankruptcy is revealing. So where does this game land? Is it destined to be tossed into the bucket of outdated games like Kid Cool that are truly too unrefined to be playable? Or could it be an early miracle like Rygar that managed to rise above the technological limitations of the time period? Let's find out. Well, it's a side-scrolling platformer with Ronald McDonald as the main character. No surprises yet. Your only method of attack is to throw apple bombs with the B button. Not cherry bombs, not jackfruit bombs, they are undeniably apple bombs. It says so in the manual. Holding the B button down also makes Ronald run faster and jump further than usual. The one thing that really gives away the age of the game, that screams pre-Mega Man 2 platformer, is that if you're still holding down the jump button at the end of a jump when you hit the ground, you'll jump again. Most well-done games, and even a lot of crappy ones, require you to actually take your finger off the button and press it again before the game acknowledges that you want to jump. While the color palette is a bit murky, the drawings themselves are actually somewhat detailed for an 8-bit game of this era. Take a look at the trees and bushes. They're actually drawn to look like trees and bushes, as opposed to single-shaded brown and green blobs. But really, what will probably strike players the most about the graphics is the drawings of the McDonald's characters. What era of McDonald's artwork were they looking at when they made this game? I know some characters like the Cheese Burglar and Fry Guys don't change much over the years, but I can't help but feel like the people who drew this rendition of Ronald McDonald that you see in the main game were looking at something very different from what I saw in my childhood. My youth is basically the late 80s and early 90s, and I remember Ronald being more modern looking than this. And the way the trees have faces and the enemies have big goofy eyes, they're almost spooky. They actually remind me a little of the life-size puppets they had at Chuck E. Cheese when I was a kid. In addition to the standard platforming stages, there's also a hot air balloon stage and an underwater level. Every stage has a boss at the end, mostly monsters with no clear relation to McDonald's, and every couple levels you'll free one of your friends after defeating the boss. One of the most beautiful things about video games, and maybe even more so with retro games, is that most of the time, you can't tell whether a game is going to be good or bad just by watching it in motion. You have to pick up the controller for yourself and really feel it out. At this point, I'm going to reveal to you guys that Donald Land is probably my favorite NES game that was never released outside of Japan. Now, after just seeing a little footage, you're probably thinking to yourself, how on earth could I enjoy that more than Moon Crystal or Gimmick or any of the other notorious Japan exclusives? Well, it's subtle. First of all, the attack system is more complex than it seems at first. The interesting thing about your bombs is that they don't kill enemies on contact. They explode after a couple seconds and have a very limited hit range, so you really have to get the timing right in order to get enemies within range of the blast. This would become tiresome if not for the fact that if you manage to land a bomb on top of an enemy, it will stay on top of their head until it goes off, guaranteeing their demise. Even more interesting is that the trajectory of your bombs is highly affected by whether you're stationary, walking, or running when you throw them. There's actually a surprisingly deep momentum engine that matches the distance your bombs fly with how fast your character is moving. This means you can really adjust how far you throw your bombs in small increments, and while simple on the one hand, it makes the game very satisfying to play. Each time you manage to get a bomb to land perfectly on top of an enemy, it just feels good. It's true the graphics are very stationary with no attempts at parallax or animation in the backgrounds, but it's an NES game. What do you want? I genuinely like the graphics, but I like the music even more. The main theme is a happy-go-lucky little ragtime piece, but there's something nostalgic and even melancholy about it. The song just instantly takes me back to an innocent mindset. In fact, that's just the word I would use to describe the overall experience of playing Donald Land. Innocent. It's pure, childlike joy, which is exactly what video games are supposed to be. I never think about how good or bad the technology is or what kind of tasks I have waiting for me after I play. I just really feel like I'm carelessly running around in a forest somewhere. You're probably wondering if the game has any flaws. Well, not really. The control is a bit loose, but that could be just as easily viewed as one of the game's good points. The difficulty is really just right. You'll have to take a little time to get used to the jump trajectory, and there are a couple noticeably hard levels in the second half of the game. But it certainly doesn't take a miracle to complete like so many 8-bit games. Final mission. Levels have to be completed in one shot. If you die, you'll go back to the beginning, even for levels with multiple sections, so some people may find this unwelcoming. And you have to press the B button in order to run, which will throw a bomb, but sometimes you need to stand on enemies to cross over pits, so you'll have to throw a bomb backwards and then start running, lest you kill the enemy that you absolutely need in order to pass the level. But again, I interpreted these things to be one more part of learning the game as opposed to downfalls of the design. When I started this channel, I said that I was going to let the real hardcore gamers know about which obscurities are really worth the money gameplay-wise, and I'm making good on that promise right now. There are many Japan-only games that are more expensive than Donald Land, but this is one that you would have genuinely been happy to receive as a Christmas present when you were a kid. And really, it's only about $150. In the grand scheme of things, that's chump change. Think about the fact that people are paying almost $1,000 for things like the US versions of Panic Restaurant or Bonk's Adventure. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Make sure you go get a workout after a hardcore gaming session, and if you enjoyed what you saw, do please hit the subscribe button, and also check out my other social media accounts. There's lots of fun stuff going on there about obscure games and upcoming events. As always, I really appreciate you guys who watch these videos to the end. You kick ass. See you next time. Begonia!